Hey everybody, welcome. I'm super excited for this webinar. This is a collaboration with Chai Coaching and Argo to help you guys learn everything about visa interviews. I'm super excited. We've got Mandy here representing Argo. We've got some great tips and information for you guys, and we're going to do live Q&A at the end. So this is your chance to ask your burning questions to a former U.S. visa officer who's served around the world, and their colleagues have done millions of interviews with countries all over the world, probably from where you guys are applying for as well. So as we get started, tune in, get your coffee, your chai ready. We're going to have a great webinar today. So thankful you guys are joining us. I'm here in Dallas. Mandy, where are you tuning in from?
I'm actually in Silicon Valley in California.
Awesome. So the Bay Area, that's, as in India they say, that's my native place. I was born and conquered. And
That's
so
right.
love the Bay Area. And Mandy, just kick us off by introducing yourself.
Yeah, Robert, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you, all of you today about the US visa interview process. I know it's something that, can seem very intimidating, and a lot of times people don't really know how visa officers think. So hopefully today I can help you dispel some of those myths and let you know, answer all of your questions. So I am a former visa officer. I spent 7 years with the US Department of State. I have worked at the US Embassy in Beijing, China, the US Consulate in Matamoros, Mexico. That actually is a border post for those of you that might know. So it's really interesting because when I worked there, I got to see some, student visa issues for students who don't like to go back to their home countries. Students in Texas like to drive down to the border, go to the consulate to get their visa stamping. So that was a really interesting time. And then I spent my final 2 years at the US Consulate in Hong Kong, where I not only made decisions on non-immigrant temporary visas like student visas, but I also spent some time managing the immigrant visa and green card unit. So that was really interesting as well. So every type of visa I've probably done. I've seen every type of weird scenario, unique situations, you name it. And I can probably give you guys a fairly good assessment of how visa officers in general think about cases like yours.
I love it. And again, I'm tuning in from here in Texas. Mandy's in California. But tell us, where are you guys tuning in from? Say your city, your state, your country. Where are you guys watching from? Would love to see where we're getting our audience, and great questions. Which countries are being represented today and where those questions are coming from. And Mandy, do you speak other languages as well? Did you have to learn languages to be a visa officer?
That's a great question, Robert. I do speak Mandarin Chinese, and that is actually my native tongue.
Cool.
I was born in Shanghai, China, and I actually, surprisingly enough, I remember my visa interview because I was 7, and I thought it was so cool when I walked into the Shanghai consulate that there was a very tall, long-haired Caucasian man who spoke Chinese, which just kind of blew my mind as a 7-year-old. Also, July 4th is about to come up, and I'm very proud, I guess, to be from a country where I had a visa interview once, and then I was able to represent my country as a US diplomat. So that was such a cool experience to have that come full circle.
Yeah, that is amazing. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Mandy's going to share some of her journey and experience as a visa officer, share some issues and tips and prep for you guys, and then again, we'll do Q&A at the end. And I just want to say, if you guys have watched any Chai coaching videos before, you know how passionate I am about networking, and this webinar would not have happened without networking. One of my friends from my undergraduate college in Tulsa, David, I knew he worked and taught English in Asia and a few different countries. He actually became a US visa officer himself. And then he's the one that saw me in Chai coaching and recommended Argo. And so it's all about networking that these incredible opportunities happen. And so let's start off. Mandy, you kind of tell us your journey of how you actually became a US visa officer.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to become a foreign service officer. So that's what we're called. It's sort of technical speak for becoming a US diplomat. You actually have to take a test. It starts with a test. You take the test. It's a very long journey. If you pass the test, you have to write a series of essays. Then you have to go in for like an all-day interview. And if you score high enough, then essentially you get an offer from the US government to become a US diplomat to serve on behalf of the country, which is obviously, something that, it's public service. People are really proud to do this. And then usually, depending on, you can select from 5 different cones as a US diplomat. And one of them is called Consular cone, which basically means that most of the work in your career will be spent doing, visa work, American citizen services work. It's also the work where you have probably the most interaction with the local country where you're working in. And so that attracts a large portion of people who are interested in becoming US diplomats. And then usually once you go in for your formal training, you figure out what country you're going to go to, then you're sort of off and you might be on the visa interview line in just a few weeks' time once you arrive in the country. Actually, sometimes even the same week. So China was where I went first. It was a really exciting place to start. What we call the visa mill, which means, it doesn't sound great, but it basically means it's very, very high volume. Tons of visa applicants come in. Before the pandemic, what I saw when I was there was we regularly had over 4,400 visa applicants walk through the embassy consular section every day, and every single those people had to be interviewed. And it's similar in places like India. It's similar in places like Brazil and Mexico, just very high volume, tons of people. And we have to make decisions fairly quickly.
Definitely. And now tell us, I think you've mentioned several countries you've served in. Kind of where have you served as a visa officer, and for how long?
Yeah. So when I joined the State Department, traditionally you only have to do 1 or 2 years as a visa officer initially. But when I joined was when we had a real demand for visa work. There was just so much more interest in students coming over to the US. So I was probably more of a non-traditional visa officer in that I spent all of my time doing consular work, even though I joined as a public diplomacy cone officer, which is more involved in press work, talking to the local community, working with Fulbright programs, things like that. But instead, I spent all 7 years basically doing visa work, which it was a really hard job, probably the hardest job I've ever done, because you knew how important every single one of those decisions you were making was, but we were under a lot of time pressure. And so, I worked in China, I worked in Mexico, I worked in Hong Kong. I think doing visa work in all of those different places also made me realize that visa officers really everywhere think alike. Of course, it helps that we have the background of the country where we're working in, but we really have we have our own culture of how we make these decisions. We all understand the time pressures. When I was in China and Mexico and Hong Kong even, I was probably making a decision on a visa every 2 to 3 minutes. And this is for temporary visas. Immigrant visas take a little bit longer. You delve a little bit deeper, but non-immigrant visas are very, very quick. And most people who are applying for their visas for the first time don't realize that you really only have like 2 to 3 minutes in front of the visa officer. And sometimes even less time than that if there are certain things that you don't even realize that, there's red flags in your case. And we're like, okay, this guy's an easy refusal. That's 30 seconds. So as a visa officer, you're put in this unique position of making decisions that are super important, but you have to make it really quickly. And that's really why it was so difficult and very exhausting. And why I think Argo really helps, because if you go into that visa interview prepared and you know what the visa officer would think when they're looking at your case, it just makes it that much easier to help the visa officer make a decision in your favor.
I love it. My friends, again, thanks so much for tuning in. This is Mandy with Argo talking about visa interviews. She was a former visa officer. And if you guys are loving this and joining us, give a big like and thumbs up to say thanks to her to giving some time out of her Friday to come give you guys some amazing tips which are coming up. And if you have a friend who's preparing to go abroad, to study abroad, to work abroad, has a visa interview come up, go ahead and text them, send them this link so they can join us, because we're going to be doing live Q&A at the end, and we want to help as many people as possible. So be sure to share and invite your friends to join this session, because we're just getting started. All right, Mandy, let's talk about the highlights and challenges that you have faced as a visa officer doing these interviews and helping people in their journeys.
Yeah, I think the highlight is definitely just how many people you get to talk to. For me personally, because I was born in China and I hadn't lived back there, to go back as a representative of the United States government, that was a huge honor, but also getting to have a lot of conversations with locals who, have plans and dreams in the United States, whether they're planning to, go to Disney for the first time, which is exciting, or yeah, lots of Disney lovers overseas.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I love Disney as well, so I totally understand. But also, people who have studied and, they're ready to go spend 4 years or even more in the United States, getting their dream education. I personally, and I'm a little biased, but I think we have the best education in the world. And so I can totally understand why international students want to come over here and study. And the really interesting thing about interviewing student visa applicants is every now and then, and it's rare, but I'll interview them, when they go for the first time to study overseas. And then a year or two later, they come back and I get them again, and just talking to them and seeing how much they have changed just from their experience in the US. Their English is so much better. They are so much more confident. They talk about being surprised that they like Mexican food, which, I was as well. So it's really fun to see how students evolve after getting a US education. The challenges I mentioned as well a little bit before is just how quickly we have to do these interviews. Some of my favorite visa interviews, the most interesting visa applicants, we spend the least amount of time talking to, because soon as the visa interview starts getting really interesting, somebody got accepted to Harvard, but their parents were farmers and they never expected this. Once you know that, they are a credible student and they have made all these plans and you believe that, that's time for the interview to end, because you can approve them. Whereas I really want to get to know them more, and we can't.
Yeah.
In some of the cases that you have to spend a little bit more time with, it is more about whether or not this person is eligible for a US visa. So you're not really talking about fun things, like really getting to know them. So I know that was always a little bit frustrating for me. So the challenges, and I sometimes I had to turn that part of my brain off, is realizing, even though I was doing an interview every 2 to 3 minutes, sometimes every 30 seconds, interviewing probably between 150 to 200 people a day, having to shut off that part of my brain that knows, okay, I've decided to not give a chance to this person to go to the United States. Just because I think if we absorbed all of that, it would be really heartbreaking for us and really hard to do our job day after day. So after a while, you do become a little bit more desensitized, and you're just like, okay, this is my job. I'm here to, figure out what this person's motives are. Do they qualify? And then just take it as a job and go as quickly as I can.
Yeah. As fun as learning about those people, you can't get too emotional, relationally attached to everybody. Otherwise you couldn't get your job done. But I'm sure there's incredible stories that you come across every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, let's talk about some of the common mistakes that students or people that are going for tourism, work. I know most of our audience here are students or people who are coming on a work visa. What are the common mistakes that you see people during those interviews?
Yeah, we saw a lot of mistakes all the time. So I think one big mistake is visa applicants, for some reason, they like to come up to the window and they like to shove all of their documents through that window. And I think it's mostly because people get really nervous. They spend a lot of time preparing the paperwork and they think, well, everything is on paper. If I push all of this through, then I don't even actually have to say anything to the visa officer and it'll present these for me. And that is just not true. And so the number one tip I would give is don't shove all those papers through the window. The officers hate that. And also knowing that it's really not about the documents. It's not about the paperwork, even though everybody thinks that's what it's about. It's about how you engage with the visa officer, how you talk about your situation. And yes, the paperwork might be important because they might ask to see something, but I would say about 80% of the process is the visa interview and how you talk to the officer and how you take those few minutes to really advocate for yourself and present your situation in a way that makes sense to the visa officer.
Definitely, definitely. So
let me think if there's any other common mistakes.
yeah.
I think something else is when people prepare in a way, like I'll give you an example. When they dress in a way that doesn't make sense for their situation. So I love this story. It's actually my colleague Ben's story. He's also an ex-visa officer, but he had a friend who was applying for a visa, and he was a skateboarder. He was one of the renowned skateboarders in China, and he was going to the US to have meetings with a skateboarding company.
Okay.
But he was preparing for his visa interview, and he was planning on buying a suit. This guy has never worn a suit before in his life. He has like tattoos on his arms. You know, he clearly is not the kind of guy who wears a suit every day.
Had the skater look.
Yeah, exactly. And at Argo, we would tell somebody like that, you know, do not wear a suit because that clearly is not who you are. It's not authentic to who you are. So you want to paint a picture that's authentic to who you are as a person. But there are a couple of caveats. I would say, you know, make sure that you are like clean and showered. You know, some people like to wear really pungent perfumes, and that can really bother the officer. So you just want to make sure that you are presenting authentically to who you are, but that, you know, you would be amazed at what we see at the visa window. You're not drunk, you know, you're not under the influence of something. You're clean, you're showered, you're presentable. You know, it's kind of like a job interview, but make sure that you are true to who you are.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I feel like that goes the same with job interviews. I feel like a lot of the same tips of job interviews here in America apply to the visa interview situation as well. As you have to be authentic. You don't want to be a scripted robot or seem weird and out of place of what you're trying to achieve. So I think that's a great observation you made.
Yeah. And, you know, and interestingly enough, I feel like that's a very American cultural thing because in other countries, you know, maybe you do always buy a suit for your first interview, job interview or visa interview. But Americans really think about things in terms of authenticity. And I think that's what we really try to show people at Argo. It's not just about what makes sense to you from where you are, but what makes sense to an American officer. And I think one other common mistake that people make is assuming that with their case, they're not going to get denied. We all know people who have been denied visas, and nobody walks into a visa interview expecting to be denied because, you know, then you would probably want to do more to prepare. But unfortunately, that's just not the case. And so I think for a lot of our clients coming to Argo, even the ones who are just like, well, I just want to do a little extra to make sure I'm prepared. When they talk to us and we look at their case, we're like, well, here's some things that's going to be surprising to you, but to a visa officer, that's going to be really strange. And I'll give you one example. I was a visa officer. I took a short trip to Chengdu, China, and worked at the consulate there. That consulate is actually no longer open, unfortunately. But one thing I noticed very quickly is when a couple came up to my window, and I'll never forget this, but it was a young couple. They had just gotten married. They were really excited to go on their honeymoon, but they were interviewing with the wife's parents. And they were like, we're all going on the honeymoon. This is going to be really great. And I thought to myself, there is no way that any newlywed couple would want to bring their parents with them on their honeymoon. And that's because Americans, that just does not make any sense. But then I actually stopped that interview to go talk to my local staff. So we do have local employees at the consulate or embassy where we work, and there are institutional knowledge about the local country's culture. And they were like, actually, in Southwest China, that is really, really common because, you know, older people in China, they don't speak English. They're nervous about traveling overseas alone, but they do really want a vacation. They tend to go with their, you know, their children who are now probably learned English growing up. And the kids are happy to do that with their parents because they want to give back to their parents for supporting them through the years. So it's actually quite common in Southwest China to bring your parents on your honeymoon. But I had to learn that. And so I think what we do here at Argo is we take the time to understand your situation, not just 2 to 3 minutes, sometimes an entire hour to find out about your travel history, your family history, your employment, your educational history. And then we want you to truthfully take out the best parts of your history and present that to the consular officer, to the visa officer in just a few minutes time, because you only have 2 to 3 minutes. You want to advocate for yourself and not be passive in the process, because, you know, that could very well get you refused if the visa officer doesn't understand culturally where you're coming from, or has questions about something, but he or she doesn't have enough time to get to the bottom of it. They might refuse your case to be safe.
Yeah, and understanding culture is so important. Like if you want to come to America, you have to be thinking from the perspective of the U.S. visa officers, of their cultural perspective, and that's why getting these cultural coaching things is so important, and knowing what they're going to be looking for. Mandy, a quick follow-up. You talked about dress and formal versus informal and kind of matching who you are. Nandini asks, is it necessary that students must be in formal clothes for a student visa interview?
I would say no. You don't have to be in formal clothes. I would say if you are, for example, you're applying for a business visa and you're a businessman and you work for a bank and you wear a suit every day, then yes, by all means, wear a suit to your visa interview, because that's how you dress every day. If you're a student, I would dress like you are going to your an interview for your first internship or for your first job. I would say business casual is totally fine. You know, if you want to wear a polo shirt or, a shirt with a collar, but just look clean and presentable and be ready to talk about what you plan on doing, with your major, and talking about why you're excited to study in the US.
I like that tip. That's great. So before we get into a few more tips on how to prep for the interview, Mandy, go ahead and tell people just a little bit more about Argo. What is this company and what services do you provide, and how can that really help people in the Chine coaching community?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Robert. So Argo is the world's first company made up entirely of ex-visa officers who have worked for the State Department at US embassies and consulates around the world. So currently we have 25 former visa officers, and they have worked in all sorts of countries: India, China, Mexico, Brazil, Canada, Nigeria. I mean, I think our dream is hopefully someday we will have an ex-visa officer from every single country that does US visa interview processing. And the reason why this company got started is because when we were visa officers behind that window, we realized how many mistakes people were making. And we realized that there is a lot of false information being spread about the visa interview process, either by visa agents, and maybe they don't know either. Sometimes people have good intentions and they want to help, but they don't understand the process. And we realized that it's such a high stakes interview. Your visa record, and I don't know if people know this, but your visa record is actually for life. So from the very first time you apply for, a tourist visa, to the next time you apply for a student visa, to eventually maybe for an H-1B or an L-1, to maybe eventually you decide you want to permanently relocate to the United States and you want to get a green card. Every single time you have a visa interview with the US government, that will be recorded in your visa record, which is why it's so important to keep that record clean and to make sure you don't have a lot of prior refusals, because every visa officer that you talk to will have access to all of their records and those notes kept by former visa officers who have interviewed you, talking about what you said to them, what your responses were like, why they approved your case or why they denied your case. And so if you're someone who has big plans in the United States, this is something that you really want to make sure you get right. And hopefully the very first time. Of course, at Argo, we help a lot of students who have been refused visas before. We help with prior refusals. But our favorite is when we prepare people who are applying for the very first time, because we can help them watch out for some common mistakes that people make, common pitfalls, to make sure that you don't have any visa refusals on your record.
I love it. And I've put a link in the chat, and it's also in the video description, but there's a special link that Argo's provided to actually give you guys a $25 discount for booking a coaching session. So they have one-on-one video coaching sessions, and everyone that you talk to with Argo is a previous former, or they say ex-visa officer who has experience doing hundreds and thousands of visa interviews, just like Mandy. And so we want to hook you guys up today with a special discount. Check that out in the link in the chat and in the video description to give you guys a shot to really succeed in your visa interviews and nail it the first time, or if you faced problems before, maybe correct those for follow-up visa interviews.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention, Robert, is we actually have 3 former vice consuls, former visa officers who have worked in Mission India. I know a lot of your audience is from India, so we have a lot of India experience. And I myself, I've never worked in India, but I've worked with a lot of Indian clients. And I think it's just because all visa officers understand our process so well that we can help people who are applying in other countries. But we do understand the India market really well.
Great, great. Yeah, you guys have such great experience, great success stories, and we want to hook you guys up with a little discount as well for attending this webinar. So thanks for coming. Now let's get to some more fun content to help you guys. But what are some of the maybe top couple tips you would give to someone who's wanting to prep for an interview, especially their first time?
I would say the first time you're applying, just make sure that, here's some tips. Make sure that your responses are not memorized. I know many students, they're so nervous about this first interview. They like to, have a script. Maybe they think they're going to be asked certain questions. That usually doesn't work. We can immediately tell when somebody has had their responses memorized. And a lot of times actually during visa interviews, student visa interviews in particular, we will like to throw in kind of a curveball and ask you a very strange question just to make sure that you're actually listening to us. We might ask you what you had for breakfast, or, what some of your hobbies are. And if you just keep going on your script, and this happens a lot actually, people will say, I chose this school because of this reason, but the question I asked was, what did you have for breakfast? That will tell us that you're listening. And number 2, maybe you don't really, you're not really telling us your real response, but you're just memorizing something. So definitely make sure that it's not memorized. The other thing is, it's really hard actually to give one size fits all advice, which is why Argo is so valuable, and we work with you one-on-one to find out the personal situation. But I think the one piece of advice I can give that will actually encompass everybody, every type of person who's applying for a visa, no matter what type of visa you're applying for, is your situation has to make sense to the visa officer. And I know that's a little bit broad, but, and I say that because, it's so important to understand the mindset of an American officer. So something that makes sense to you may not necessarily make sense to the American visa officer who only has a couple of minutes. So you really want to help the visa officer understand your situation. One other thing I would say is make sure you don't give one-word answers. It is exhausting being a visa officer. You have to ask questions all day long. And occasionally when we ask somebody, why are you going to the United States? They say, study. Then we have to ask a follow-up question, sometimes 3 or 4 follow-up questions before we can even get a concrete answer out of this person. That just makes us very, very cranky. So, people say, study. Okay, what will you be studying? Business. Okay, where will you be studying? So there's a big difference between a one-word answer versus an answer in just, 1 or 2 sentences, very clearly explains what you're going to be doing, where you're studying, what your major is. But you also, and this is why it's so hard, you don't want to say too much. We've also had a lot of clients come to us where we ask them one And they're like, blah, 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 blah. This, my uncle said this, and this happened to my dad way back when, and my mom had this crazy thing happen to her. And a lot of that information is not relevant, and that also can kind of overwhelm the visa officer and confuse them as to exactly what you're going to do. So you want to find that good balance between not giving one-word responses, but also not saying too much that will overwhelm the visa officer. You want to say just the right amount to give them enough information to want to approve your case.
It's having that perfect balance of the right amount of information, not too little, not too much. That definitely takes practice and probably even some really helpful coaching. So yeah, I love that tip. Yeah, so I think the big tips that you guys want to walk away with is, again, don't have a rehearsed, memorized response. Be able to comfortably dialogue and communicate, and having the right amount of information to share. Not too much, not too little, but so that the officers can understand clearly what's going on, but get through that interview process succinctly. So
that's right. And I think one other thing too is just having the confidence to go in there and really own your story and what you're going to do. Because a lot of times it's not really about that specific situation or that particular school or that particular major. It's about how you say it and how you talk about it. And I think that's really what we're able to help with at Argo, because once you come to us and you understand what to expect, it's much easier to be confident and know what questions might come up and how do you talk about yourself so you're putting your best foot forward instead of testing it out for the first time. That's a very, very high stakes test. And I would not, it's very risky to go in without preparing. And as I always tell international students, you're preparing for the TOEFL, you're preparing, you're applying to different schools, writing essays, maybe even doing university interviews. This is just another part of the process that you absolutely have to prepare for. Don't go in blindly because you just don't know what could happen.
Those are awesome tips, Mandy. Before we get going in the, let me throw this up here, Q&A section, I want to just tell you guys about the Chine Coaching newsletter. Just threw the link there in the chat for you guys in the video description. But if you want to be informed about future live events, webinars, and great tips, be sure to be subscribed to our newsletter. In 2 weeks, I'll be doing another session like this with an immigration lawyer here in America. Sophie, she's one of the top immigration lawyers in California, helping people with all their visa issues, getting those H-1Bs, green cards. So in a couple weeks, we're going to be doing this again. So don't want you guys to miss out on that. And then also connect with us on social media. Be sure to follow Argo on Instagram, on LinkedIn. They have a great resources. I was checking out their social media, so you definitely want to follow them there as well. Any other ways people can connect with you guys, Mandy?
Yeah, we actually have a private Facebook group, and we put in unique insights in there that we don't put on all of our social media channels. So if you go onto Facebook and search for Argo Visa, advice from former U.S. visa officers, you'll be able to find us and join our group.
Okay, and if you want to send that to me, I can put it in our next newsletter as well. So be happy to share that with people.
That would be great.
All right, we are going to do some Q&A. Again, like this video to say thanks to Mandy and all the great tips that she has been sharing. I've learned so much. This has been so much fun because I definitely get a lot of visa interview questions from incoming students, and I love the messages that I get when they've gotten those visas. But man, it's a tricky, tough thing, and even if they get those admits, there's still that visa interview which can determine and change everything. So. All right, we're going to start taking some of your guys' questions. Appreciate your guys' patience, but this has been a lot of fun. So I'm going to kind of go back here, and if you also see any, Mandy, let me know.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, here's, I think, one that gets commonly asked a lot from Vipul. Is it real that students get rejected if you book your visa appointment through an agent?
No. It's not true. But I think, again, focus on the visa interview itself. We don't really care who you exactly book it through. We just care about the visa interview itself and talking to you and understanding your situation.
That's great. Okay, another big common question that I've gotten. Does your first interview, if you got a rejection, impact or affect your second interview?
It does. So every time you get refused a visa, it becomes harder for you to get that visa approved, which means I think for this person, your second interview is going to be really important. Because it's possible for the visa officer to think, okay, maybe the first visa officer didn't have time to really look into the situation. I'm going to take a second look at this person, see what I think. That interview will be so important, but you have to understand why you were refused the first time and not just go in expecting that things will be different if you don't prepare. The other thing is the State Department likes to say that every single visa applicant is getting a fresh look at their application, no matter how many times you apply. But I think practically speaking, that's just not true. The second or the third time your case gets looked at by visa officers, of course, they will try to give you the benefit of doubt. But I know from my time working at the visa window, usually what I'll do is I will immediately see that my colleague refused this visa last week, and I will just hop off the window and go talk to him. I'll be like, do you remember this person? Why did you refuse this person? We'll have a quick little conversation about this. And so when you're going in for your second or third interview because you've been prepared or you've been refused, just keep in mind that it's really going to be your word versus the word of this visa officer's colleague that they probably eat lunch with every day and they see on the weekends and they're probably friends. And so you really want to make sure that you're prepared to address the reasons why it was refused before. And how we do that at Argo is, it's true. Nobody can tell you exactly why you were refused, but just from the questions that you were asked, from what happened at the visa window, we'll have clients telling us, there were 2 officers at the window and then they left for a while and then they came back. We can decipher all of that and understand exactly what happened and what they're worried about. Because, I myself interviewed over 100,000 people. And so it's like, I can do visa interviews in my sleep because I've done so many of them and I know exactly how we think and how we make these decisions. And we can give you probably a fairly accurate assessment of why you were refused and how can we turn that around and how can we change the visa officer's mindset the next time.
Yeah, and this is why this is titled The Secrets from U.S. Visa Officers, because you guys get to learn the behind the scenes, perspective of what these visa officers are thinking, which is, really hard to figure out sometimes. So Harsh has a great question. What does the visa officer actually look for when they're asking about funding?
Yeah, so they want to make sure that you can pay and can afford the tuition in the United States. So we all know that U.S. education, it's not inexpensive. It's thousands of dollars, and we want to make sure that you're actually able to pay for that. And so one way you can demonstrate that to us is just talking about your family situation, talking about where the funding is coming from, and making sure that it makes sense. I think for this portion of the interview, a lot of students like to just have a letter from like a loan agent or maybe a letter from their mom or dad's companies. And that's all great that you have that, but we want to understand from your perspective, how can they afford it? So that conversation and that discussion is going to be much more important than what's on paper. I have approved visas for people who didn't bring in any funding paperwork, just because they're able to talk about their history and their family life and what their parents do, or if they're getting a loan or how are they repaying the loan. That enough is enough to convince me that this person has thought through the process and has made plans to be able to afford the tuition. Whereas some people will come in with so much paperwork and I'll be like, well, how do you plan on paying for your tuition? And they're like, well, it's all on paper. Can you just look at this? And, don't be surprised if generally these officers say, I don't want to look at that. I just want to talk to you and understand your situation. Because we know as visa officers that papers and documents can be forged. There's a lot of black markets out there in foreign countries that will give you every single type of document you need, whether it's bank statements or housing documents or whatever it is. But what can't be forged and what can't be faked is the actual visa interview itself and the visa officer looking into your eyes, looking into your soul maybe, and understanding where you're coming from and how you have made plans to pay for your tuition.
those communication skills and soft skills are so important.
Absolutely.
So, all right, my friend Nilesh, he's actually there in the Bay Area too. He's asking, can a student from a country like India afford these Argo fees? Do you want to talk about the fees? And, I know people are coming from countries where currency is different, the exchange rates. And so, yeah, how can people consider this and factor this into their budget for their going abroad journey?
Yes. So I'm so glad that you asked this. So a 30-minute consultation with a former visa officer is $450 US, and an hour is $750. So we usually recommend the hour-long session for clients who have been refused a visa before, or maybe their situation is a little bit more complicated. They need a little bit more time. And so I know that this can be very expensive for some students, but you are going to the United States to study in the US. It's already kind of an expensive journey. And so this part I think is so important to making sure that you actually get there, you get to campus and you get a chance at that degree. And we have to pay all of our Argo officers for their time. We pay to maintain our platform. And so this is the price that it's our global price. And so it makes sense worldwide for what is an Argo interview and the value that we bring to help you prepare for your visa interview. And the other thing I want to say is that last year about 30% of our clients were from India. And I know that for Indian clients, sometimes this price seems a little bit high, but I can tell you that just from feedback from our Argo clients, they have told us it is worth every penny. We've also had clients from India who have had to save up for a few months before they can afford an Argo consultation, and they're still very happy they went through the process. And so hopefully, we give a little bit of a discount today that will help you on your journey and making sure that you're prepared for this really important process.
Thanks for clarifying that, Mandy. All right. Marianne's got a question for us. She's got her visa approved to attend one school, but realized she would rather go to another school. Is it possible to transfer to the other school, or would she need to do another visa interview?
So that is a great question. And I think that you actually have to go in for another visa interview. So again, you want to make sure that your situation is as simple as possible for a government official, because regulations are changing on us all the time. So if you, for example, have a visa approved to go to one school, then you decide to transfer, then you enter the United States through CBP, and then they're asking you, wait, but the visa says that you're going to this one school, but you actually, you actually have an I-20 from another school. What's going on? You want to keep things really simple so that government officials across multiple agencies for this entire process doesn't get confused. So that's what I would recommend. It may depend on the post, and these things change all the time.
Sounds good. And then another good one, Azwa asked, how difficult is it to apply for an F1 visa outside of your home country?
This is a really great question, and it's been coming up a lot because of COVID. Sometimes there's no visa interviews in your home country. You're able to get it in a different country. So for these types of cases, we call them third country national cases, and there's a higher standard. So it becomes more difficult to get your visa approved. And this is because when you're applying outside of your home country, the visa officer in that other country may not have the confidence to approve a visa, because culturally what they understand is the country where they're making that decision. But of course, this is something that we help with at Argo as well. So if you're someone who can only get a visa appointment outside of your home country, or you just have a special reason to do that because maybe you are a resident of a different country and you've been studying there, work with us first, because then we can help you make sure you're prepared for that higher bar, because you're probably going to get more scrutiny from the visa officer to understand why you're applying in a third country.
Those are great tips. And Aditya is asking, does a previous B1, B2 visa approval recently help the visa officer when trying to get an F1? Now, is B1, B2, is that a tourist visa?
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
tourist/business visa.
Okay.
And yes, generally already having one visa category that's been approved, and maybe you've been to the US once on vacation, now you're applying for a student visa, that is a positive factor in your visa application process.
Good to hear. Yeah, that's a very common question I've got a lot, is does having a previous visa help or hurt getting a F1 visa?
Yeah.
So,
And on the flip side of that, Robert, and I'll just mention this, sometimes you'll get refused a student visa, and what people don't realize is a lot of times the visa officer will also cancel your current tourist or business visa. And it's because if you're not
okay.
eligible for one visa category, maybe you did something, or maybe you had a law enforcement issue in the US and you're coming back and you think that the State Department you're applying for your student visa. If you're not eligible for your student visa, you're probably not eligible for your tourist visa either. So just keep that in mind, that that could be a
Okay. My friend Sanket is asking, what is your advice on preparing when one goes for stamping for the first time after getting their H-1B? Anything different with that process?
Yeah. So H-1B visas, we do a lot of these. It gets very technical. So when you have your first job in the United States after graduating and you're going on for your H-1B visa stamping, we like to hear about what kind of work you will be doing. So a lot of it will be about how you talk about your position as an H-1B. Are you working off-site? What are some of your responsibilities? What will you be managing anyone, or are you entry level? These are the types of things that we like to hear about. We like to hear about some of the details of the work that you're doing, and not, a one-word answer or way too much in terms of what you're responding with.
That's great. We've gotten several questions about what to show for funding with F1 visa. So a lot of people are asking, is an education loan is the primary funding source?
Hamper any chances of F1 visa approval. So Robert, can you hear me? Sorry, you cut out a little bit.
Yeah.
So no problem.
I can hear you. We're good.
So having an educational loan as your primary source of funding shouldn't hamper your chances of getting a F1 visa approval, assuming that you're handling the interview the right way. Most students in the United States, American students, take out loans to attend university. So this is not a new concept to us. We understand that some students need to get a loan to be able to afford tuition, because it can be very expensive in the United States. But it also is important how you talk about that in terms of, how you got this loan, how do you plan on repaying it, just giving us a little bit more details about that. But that alone should not negatively impact your chances.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's all about the communication. Magda is asking about if they're having multiple sponsors, like 3 sponsors. Would that seem suspicious, or is that a common thing to have multiple sponsors for their visa and their funding?
It's actually not that important how many sponsors you have, but what is important is visa officers generally like to understand your relationship with those sponsors. Why are these people sponsoring you? Why? And so be prepared to talk about that, because I think a lot of times people are more focused, okay, I have my 3 sponsors, I have enough funding, and they go in expecting that the visa officer will just stamp the visa. But the visa officer might wonder, why is this person, agreeing to pay $30,000 for this student's education? And it has to make sense to them. If it's a distant uncle that you've never talked to based on our interview with you, that might seem a little bit suspicious. So making sure that, whatever the truth is, that it makes sense to the visa officer.
Calvin's asking, if you make a mistake on the DS-260 form, can you correct it during the interview?
Generally, yes. So if you make a mistake on the DS-260, I would contact the embassy or consulate first and let them know that it was a mistake so you can correct it, but definitely bring it up during the interview as well. And usually during the intake process, that's when you can bring it up.
That's great. All right, another question we've been getting a lot of is funds that are required for tourist visas.
Mm-hmm. So it's not like you need a particular amount of funds as a tourist to go to the United States. But I think what visa officers would like to see is that the situation makes sense. So maybe this is, you want to go to Hawaii for 2 weeks for vacation. But we're looking at your passport and we're like, oh, this person has never traveled anywhere before. Why do you all of a sudden want to go all the way across the world to Hawaii? Does that really make sense? That seems very strange. And then also, what kind of job you have, or, what is your family background? So being able to, present yourself in a way and helping them understand that situation. If you're someone that works in a very lowly paid job, but you want to take a very extravagant trip to the United States and you want to spend 4 months there, that might not make sense to the visa officer. So again, make sure that everything makes sense to an American officer.
That's good. This is
So this is a great question. Robert, can you hear me? Sorry, there's still a little bit of internet instability, I think. Hey, Robert.
Okay, sorry about that, guys.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So yeah, the question is there any specific set of questions that visa officers ask, or the specific things they're targeting on? I think I know what you're going to say about this, but would love for everyone to hear.
Yeah. So generally the questions are targeted towards what type of visa a person is applying for. So if you're applying for a student visa, then we most likely will ask you about your plans in the US at the school. What will you be studying? So make sure that you're ready for that. But if you're applying for example, an H-1B visa or an L-1, then most of those questions will probably be more about your work in the United States. If it's an L1, we'll want to know, are you, going to be a manager, or do you have specialized knowledge? So those are some common questions. So it's all going to be about that particular visa category.
That's great. And then the common question I get is about rejections. People ask, how do we find out why we're rejected after giving the rejection under Section 214B?
Yeah. So Section 214B is, if you've ever been refused a visa, you've likely gotten that slip that says you're rejected under Section 214B of the INA. And what people don't realize is that it actually is very broad. It covers everything. So it just basically means that the visa officer does not want to give you a visa for some reason. They don't think you're eligible. They don't know if you're credible or not. They have some doubts about why you're going to the United States. And there's no real way of knowing why you were refused a visa unless you can get into the government system and look at the notes why you were refused. But the best way to do that is actually having an Argo consultation, because once we understand what happened during the interview, what types of questions you were asked, what responses you gave, any other actions by the visa officer, we usually can take a fairly accurate guess at why you were refused and what parts of the visa application process that you need to sort of do better on in order to pass the next time.
That's great. This is a good one from Ujwal. Another big common question I get is the impact of changing their major. So say they studied computer science, but they want to do, management course, or, go from electrical engineering to computer science, or I don't know, changing their majors or degree from undergraduate to master's or something like that. What does that impact anything?
I think it will probably generate some questions from the visa officer. You know, if you went from like computer engineering and all of a sudden you want to get your master's in art history, then we might want to know why you're making that change. And again, it's all about how effectively you're engaging with the visa officer. You know, a lot of things change when you're when you're a young person and you're trying to decide what you want to study for the rest of your life. So of course we understand that majors can change. Sometimes your interests can shift. Maybe you started taking the classes and then you realize you hated that major. But what we want to understand from you is how you came to that decision. Not necessarily the fact that you did it is a red flag, but we want to know why.
Yeah, I think in general in America, it's very more normal here to change your degree or your focus of studies compared to other parts of the world. So that's a common thing, but just being able to communicate why you're doing that seems like to be the important part.
Yes.
Ooh, here's a good one. They're asking about how can they respond to, do you have relatives in the US? You know, that can be a good thing, that could be a bad thing. You know, what are visa officers thinking about this question?
That is a really good question. So the perfect response for this question is always to be truthful. If you have family in the US, if you have immediate family members in the US, you always want to disclose that on your DS-160 form because sometimes they might already know. And so if you're not being truthful, and how visa officers think about this is the second they discover that you haven't been truthful about one question, they think, well, I can't believe any of the responses that this person has told me because you've shown to me that you're not a credible person. So you always want to be honest. You always want to be truthful. But it is, again, all about how you explain the situation with your family in the US. If you have a lot of family in the US, you know, that could be an issue for the visa officer. They might be worried that your ties in the United States are stronger than your ties to your home country. And again, you would want to work with an expert to talk about that situation and, you know, explain it in a way that is understandable to the officer. But you always want to be truthful.
Yeah. I think the same answer you just gave is going to apply for this one as well. You know, someone's asking if they apply to 4 or 5 schools, you know, in and around New York, kind of a concentrated area in the States. Is that going to raise the flag of people going to try and, you know, stay longer in the US versus returning home after studies? You know, I think, you know, it's about being truthful and explaining your reason for those applications. But is there anything else to add to this specific question?
Yeah, I would say, you know, if you have chosen a particular region in the United States where you want to study, you know, consular officers, visa officers are really smart. They're going to want to know why specifically. What is it about that area? You can apply anywhere in the country. Why? And so having an answer that makes sense, that's truthful, you know, don't make something up. You know, maybe you have family in that part of the country. And actually for some people, it makes sense because they're worried about being away from home and not having a support system to turn to. So that could actually be a good factor, not necessarily negative. But I think people get so nervous about what the right answer is, and there really is no right answer. It's just about how you talk to the visa officer and being truthful and heartfelt in your discussion about what's going on in your life.
That's good. And so many good questions here. I'm trying to make sure we're not repeating the same ones here. Okay, here's one. How many times can they apply for an F1 visa interview based on, I guess, you know, having to make changes or getting rejections or different things like that?
You can apply as many times as you want. And so there's really no limit on the number of times you can apply for your F1 visa interview. But it's such a process. You pay $160 every time. You have to stand in line. You have to find that visa appointment. Our goal at Argo is to always make sure that you know, you're successful on the first try that you apply instead of having to go back, being nervous all over again. But there is no limit.
As many times as you guys want.
Hopefully not that many times.
Yes. All right. Do backlogs matter in visa interviews? Maybe you're familiar with the term backlog?
Are they talking about waiting for that visa appointment?
No, this is with their courses in college. So a backlog is like a course in maybe their undergrad that hasn't been cleared yet, or they didn't pass and have to maybe retake. So it's kind of a hold in their maybe transcript or the degree.
Mm.
That's a term that's used in Indian education system. I don't know if it's in other countries. So
yeah, I'm so glad you explained that, because backlog means something totally different to a visa officer.
yes.
So if you have a hold on the degree, I think that it could come up during the visa interview. So you'll want to be able to explain that in a way that's really understood by the visa officer, if they ask about it. If they don't ask about it, it sounds like maybe it's something that's just pending, but it'll get approved soon. I would bring that up because it'll probably confuse the visa officer. If they ask about it, just make sure that you have an answer that's short and concise.
Okay. Kind of a good follow-up to that one. Alka's asking, how should students address any concerns regarding their undergrad major and average GPA, especially if they didn't study quants earlier, a specific subject, but wanted to do a STEM program later?
Yeah. So visa officers do look at grades for students, especially if you're a returning student and, maybe this is a student visa renewal. We like to see what your GPA is. If it's really low, you're flunking all of your classes, then sometimes we will refuse the follow-up renewal visa. And so if there's any concerns, I would say just answer truthfully. We know that students have a lot of things going on in their lives in the United States. Maybe they're going through a really hard time. Maybe something happened at home, but we just want to hear exactly what's going on and try to understand your situation.
That's great. So we've just crossed an hour. Mandy, do you got time for just a couple more questions before we wrap up? Would that be okay?
Yeah, that would be fine.
Okay, we'll take a couple. You guys have asked so many awesome questions. Thanks so much. Give a like and thumbs up, or give some love to Mandy in the comments for her insights and her time. This has been so much fun. Sorry if we don't get to all of the questions, trying to pick the most relevant or helpful ones for you guys. We'll just do a couple more before we wrap up. This is another good one that I've gotten before, is community college. Does applying to community college reduce the chances of getting the visa or studying abroad?
That is a great question. So in general, I'm going to be totally honest, visa officers tend to be tougher on community college visa applicants. And it's not necessarily because it's a community college. Those are great institutions. You can get a great education at a community college. It's just that as visa officers, we know that the standards for community colleges tend to be lower than for four-year universities or Ivy League schools. The reason why people always talk about how if you get into Harvard or Stanford, you won't have any problems at your visa interview, I think it's because visa officers know that the caliber of those students are so high because they have to go through so much to even get accepted at those schools, whereas community colleges tend to accept way more people and have much lower standards, which means that we will ask more questions, scrutinize more to make sure that this person is actually intending to go study in the US and not using that community college acceptance as an excuse for going over there and working or doing something else.
I know with the pandemic, a lot of colleges have no longer required some of these entrance exams like GMAT, GRE, TOEFL, IELTS. And so people choosing not to give those because they're no longer required, does that have any impact or negative on the visa interview?
It might, but I think it has been such a weird year, and not being able to take those exams, I think, is a pretty good excuse for not having those exams. So I think just being able to explain that in a very clear way to the visa officer why you didn't have that exam score, or, the school changing its policy.
That's great. Oh, here's a good one from Ashwini. Having a child of 5 years old and planning to do a master's abroad, would that impact a visa approval rate?
I don't think so. People have kids all the time when they're into their master's programs. I don't think that affects it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, people do their master's later on in life, and so family and children happen. So that's a normal thing.
Yeah, the visa officer might ask about that. They might say, "Oh, I see you have, young children. what are your plans? Who's going to help you with childcare if you're in the middle of studying for exams, and just be truthful.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, I'll pick one more here that we can wrap up with, something that we haven't talked about yet. Okay, this might be an interesting one. Jeffrey's asking, does managing a family business and not a government job impact your chances of getting a student visa?
I don't think so. Having any type of job is fine when you're applying for your student visa. I think the immediate question that came to my mind when I saw this question was, well, if you leave and you're studying in the US, who's going to be managing your family business then? You've been running it. So, make sure you are prepared to answer that question. And yeah, as long as it makes sense and how you handle that visa interview.
Awesome. Well, you guys, we're going to wrap it up there. Sorry if we didn't get to all your questions, but Mandy, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for spending your time. Do you have any final closing words that you want to share with everyone that's been hanging out with us today?
Yeah, absolutely. We welcome you to the United States. I know that sometimes when you go in for your visa interview, visa officers can be a little bit cranky. They've already been talking to so many people. But just keep in mind that everybody wants you to study in the US. We welcome international students, and we wish you the best of luck. Hopefully, come look us up at Argo if you have any questions about a specific case or whether or not we can help. You can email us at hello@argovisa.com, and we're happy to respond to you. And we just wish you the best for your success in the future in the United States.
Definitely. As we wrap up, go ahead and share in the comments something that was thankful. And an application point for you guys is go on LinkedIn. Mention on LinkedIn, make a post, share some helpful tip you learned today. Tag me, tag Mandy, give a shout out to her, thanking her on LinkedIn. That's a great application takeaway that you guys can do to help other people. Share a helpful tip that you guys learned, and give Mandy a shout out on LinkedIn as well. And again, here at Shine Coaching, we love helping people be successful in their cross-cultural journeys, studying abroad, working abroad, cracking these visa interviews. And I learned so much from Mandy today, some great, incredible tips. The link that we've shared with you guys gives you also a $25 discount. We want to hook you guys up, help you guys out to be ready to go and succeed in those visa interviews so that you can accomplish those dreams, achieve those goals. Mandy, thanks so much again. And if you guys want us to do something else again, or maybe try and bring a visa officer who's worked in India or some other country sometime, let us know. We can do another one of these in the future. But Mandy, this has been a privilege. And everyone, thanks so much for tuning in Shine Coaching. We'll see you guys next time. Cheers.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.